My name is Hannah Park, and I almost lost everything on one ordinary morning. I had 2 jobs and 1 shot at a better life waiting for me across the city. A job interview that could finally lift my mother and me out of debt. That morning, I woke before dawn, ironed my only good blouse twice, and rehearsed my answers in the mirror until my voice stopped shaking. I told myself this was the day everything would change. I ran through the crowded street with my resume folder pressed against my chest, my shoes slapping wet pavement, my breath tearing at my throat. The bus was right there, doors open, waiting like a promise. I waved both arms and shouted for the driver to hold on just 1 more second. He saw me. I know he saw me. Then the street froze. A line of black SUVs rolled in and blocked the road like a wall of steel, engines low and heavy. Bodyguards stepped out first, scanning the sidewalk with flat, unbothered eyes. Then a tall man in a black suit stepped out behind them, calm and silent, as if the whole city belonged to him and always would. The driver refused to move until the convoy passed. The bus doors closed right in front of my face. I slammed my palm against the glass, tears burning my eyes, as the bus pulled away without me, carrying my interview, my chance, my mother's apartment, everything I had worked for. I turned toward the man in the black suit, my chest shaking with a fury I had never felt before in my life. I did not know his name yet. I only knew he had just ruined everything, and strangely, he was watching me the entire time like I was the first honest thing he had seen in years. A man near me muttered that I should be grateful the convoy had not simply run me over, that people like him did not stop for anyone, ever. I did not understand the fear in his voice yet. I only understood that my future had just driven away in a cloud of exhaust, and the man responsible had not even blinked. I learned his name from a stranger's whisper on the sidewalk later that same afternoon. Kang Min-jae. People said it the way you say a warning, quietly, glancing over their shoulder first. He ran one of the most feared organizations in the entire city. Rivals feared him. Police looked the other way when his cars rolled past. Even his own grandmother, who begged him constantly to marry and secure the family's future, could never make him show real feeling toward anyone she introduced. But that morning, he could not stop thinking about a crying girl standing alone at a bus stop. I did not know that yet. All I knew was that when I finally dragged myself home, a yellow eviction notice was taped crookedly to our apartment door. My mother lay sick in the next room, her medicine bills stacked unpaid on the kitchen table, and our landlord had given us only 7 days before we lost the only home we had left. I sank to the floor and cried harder than I had in years, whispering over and over that it all started with one arrogant man who thought the whole street belonged to him. What I could not have known was that Kang Min-jae, a man who trusted almost no one, had already given his assistant one quiet, unusual order. Find the girl from the bus stop. Find out her name, her story, and why he could not stop seeing her face every time he closed his eyes. 2 days later, a man in a gray suit knocked politely on our door and said Mr. Kang wished to speak with me privately. I almost slammed the door shut in his face, but the mention of help with my mother's hospital bills made my hand freeze on the handle. I hated myself a little for hesitating. I met Kang Min-jae in a quiet office high above the city, a room that smelled like leather and old money and control. He did not apologize for the bus, not once. He simply offered me a new job, money for my mother's care, and a private driver to take me anywhere I needed to go, all delivered in the same flat, business-like tone he probably used to close deals worth millions. "You think money fixes what you broke?" I asked, my voice shaking with disgust. "You humiliated me in front of a crowd. You cost me my future in about 10 seconds. And now you think a check makes all of it disappear?" For the first time in years, someone spoke to Kang Min-jae without a trace of fear. Instead of anger, something flickered behind his dark eyes that looked almost like respect, almost like curiosity he did not know what to do with. I refused every single offer and walked straight out of that office, my chin held high even though my knees were trembling. What I never saw was his uncle, Chairman Seo, watching quietly from the shadowed hallway, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. He had just discovered the one weakness his untouchable nephew had never shown before in his entire life: me. Within a single week, my whole world turned upside down. Reporters, secretly paid by Chairman Seo, began publishing stories claiming I was dating the Mafia boss for his money, that I had planned the bus stop scene from the very beginning to trap him. My manager fired me the same afternoon the first article appeared online, saying my reputation made customers uncomfortable. My closest friends stopped answering my calls, one by one. Even our landlord looked at me differently now, like I was something he wanted out of his building faster. I did not understand how one refused offer had exploded into a citywide scandal overnight. Min-jae found out quickly. He traced the false stories back to reporters who had all received the same generous anonymous payment, and he realized someone was punishing me because of him. For a man who had spent his whole life guarding his reputation above almost everything else, something inside him shifted that week. Protecting me suddenly mattered more than protecting his own name in the newspapers. Then one night, alone in my room, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was short, cold, and precise. "Stay away from Kang Min-jae, or your mother will not survive the week." My hands shook so hard I dropped the phone onto the floor. I read the words 3 times, hoping desperately that I had misunderstood something. I had not. Someone dangerous was watching me closely, and they already knew exactly where it would hurt the most. I sat awake the rest of that night with my back against my mother's door, listening to every sound outside our building. I did not sleep at all. By morning, I had made up my mind that no job, no apology, and no amount of money was worth risking her life over. I cut off all contact with Min-jae that very same night. I blocked his assistant's number, ignored every message that slipped through anyway, and told myself firmly that if I simply stayed far away, my mother would finally be safe again. What I did not know was that Min-jae respected my sudden silence completely, never once pushing, but quietly assigned trusted men to watch over me from a careful distance, without my knowledge or permission. One night, walking home late from a temporary cleaning job, 2 masked men grabbed my arms and began dragging me toward a waiting van. I screamed until my throat burned raw, kicking and twisting against their grip. Suddenly, headlights flooded the narrow alley, and Min-jae himself stepped out of the car, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. The attackers released me and ran before he even lifted a hand toward them. I stood there shaking, furious and frightened all at once. "You did this," I shouted at him, tears streaking my face. "You brought danger into my life the moment your convoy blocked that street." He looked at me steadily, without flinching from my anger, and said something I never expected to hear from a man like him. "I will stay away, exactly like you asked me to, but I will protect you anyway, whether you want me to or not." Later that night, his men caught one of the attackers hiding near the docks. Under careful questioning, the man finally admitted something that changed everything I thought I understood. He had been hired by someone inside Min-jae's own family. While investigating the attack, Min-jae uncovered something neither of us could have ever imagined on our own. 20 years earlier, during a terrible warehouse fire, a stranger had pulled a young boy from the smoke and flames and vanished into the night before anyone could learn his name. That boy, it turned out, had been Min-jae. His father had spent years quietly searching for his son's rescuer, desperate to thank him properly, but had never once succeeded. That rescuer, old employment records now clearly showed, had been my own father. I found faded photographs buried in my mother's closet that proved my father had once worked closely alongside Min-jae's father, years before I was even born. Neither of us could understand why this connection had been buried so deeply, or why nobody in either family had ever spoken a single word about it. Someone, it seemed, had worked very hard over many years to quietly erase every record joining our 2 families together. Sitting across from Min-jae in my mother's small, cramped kitchen that evening, I felt dizzy from the size of what we had just discovered. Fate somehow had connected us long before that rainy morning at the bus stop. It had not been an accident that his convoy blocked my path that day. Not really. Not underneath everything. For the first time since we met, I looked at him and did not feel only anger boiling inside my chest. I felt something more complicated, something warmer and more frightening, something I was not ready to name out loud just yet. My mother, when I told her, went very quiet for a long time. She said my father had never once mentioned Min-jae's family, not even a whisper, and that frightened her more than anything else we had uncovered so far. If a good man like my father had chosen to bury this secret so completely, she said, then someone dangerous must have given him a very good reason. Chairman Seo was far from finished with either of us. He ordered my mother taken directly from her hospital bed while I was out searching desperately for answers about the old warehouse fire. I came home that evening to an empty room, tangled sheets, and a single note warning me to stay quiet if I ever wanted to see her alive again. Min-jae used every connection his organization still had left to search the entire city for her. I refused to simply sit and wait helplessly by the phone. I went looking myself, ignoring every warning about the danger I was walking straight into without thinking twice. Instead of arguing about my safety the way I expected him to, Min-jae let me help him search. We worked side by side through cold warehouses and quiet shipping yards long after midnight, checking every lead together, sharing thermoses of coffee in silence. Somewhere between the fear and those long, exhausting nights, something between us grew quieter and steadier than it had ever been before. Then, finally, I found her. Inside an abandoned warehouse near the docks, I saw my mother, tied tightly to a wooden chair, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. Standing beside her, smiling like a man who had already won everything, stood Chairman Seo himself, waiting patiently. My knees went weak beneath me. I understood instantly that I had walked straight into a trap built specifically, carefully, for me alone. I offered myself in exchange for my mother's freedom, begging Chairman Seo through trembling lips to simply let her go home safely. He laughed at me, a cold, ugly sound that echoed off the metal walls of the empty warehouse. He had never once planned to release either one of us alive that night. Before his men could close in, the heavy doors burst open behind us. Min-jae stormed inside with his own loyal people close behind him. The fight that followed was fast and brutal, fists and shouting, and overturned crates filling the freezing building. Somehow, through sheer luck and desperate timing, my mother and I both escaped without serious harm. But Chairman Seo escaped too, slipping out a side door, carrying something far more dangerous than any weapon. Hidden evidence, powerful enough to destroy Min-jae's entire organization the moment it reached the public eye. 2 days later, a message arrived through a trusted go-between. Chairman Seo would release everything he had unless Min-jae stepped down from power completely and disappeared quietly from the city forever, leaving his empire and his name behind for good. I watched Min-jae read that message in complete silence, his jaw tight, his eyes distant and unreadable. For the first time since I had known him, he looked truly cornered, caught helplessly between the empire his family had spent decades building and the people he was now desperately trying to protect from it. To my complete shock, Min-jae walked into the police station on his own and surrendered himself directly to investigators. His own people could barely believe what he had done. He believed, quietly and stubbornly, that giving himself up would finally keep both my mother and me safe from Chairman Seo's reach, for good. I refused to simply accept that sacrifice, sitting down. While he waited behind cold bars, I started digging through every old document I could find, every warehouse fire report, every faded photograph hidden in drawers nobody had opened in years. The quiet, ordinary woman everyone had once dismissed as helpless slowly became the very center of an investigation that frightened even powerful men. Late one night, a retired detective who had known my father years earlier contacted me secretly through an old friend. He handed me a thick file that changed absolutely everything I believed. It proved, in careful detail, that Kang Min-jae had never once been responsible for his own father's murder, the very crime everyone assumed had haunted him because of some hidden guilt he carried alone. I read those papers with shaking hands late into the night, then rushed straight to the detention center at dawn to see him. Through the thick glass between us, I told him the truth I had finally uncovered after weeks of searching. His face went pale, then slowly hardened with a kind of pain I had never once seen in him before. A guard tried to end our visit early, but Min-jae asked for one more minute, just one, and pressed his palm flat against the glass. I matched mine to his on the other side. Neither of us said anything else. We did not need to. The evidence I found led even further than either of us had expected that morning. Chairman Seo had personally orchestrated Min Jae's father's murder years earlier. Also, he could quietly seize control of the family's organization for himself while everyone mourned. Min Jae had spent his entire adult life secretly blaming himself for a death he had never actually caused, carrying guilt that was never truly his to carry. His father's oldest and most trusted advisor finally admitted the painful truth after years of silence. He had hidden it deliberately, terrified that exposing Seo openly would ignite a bloody war between rival families that could destroy everyone involved, including the very people he was trying to protect. Min Jae was released from custody the moment the new evidence reached the right hands inside the department. But learning the full truth broke something quiet and steady inside him. He wanted revenge immediately, cold and burning and absolute. I sat with him for hours that night, gently reminding him that revenge would only trap him forever in the same darkness Chairman Seo had lived inside his whole ugly life. Slowly, painfully, reluctantly, he finally listened to me. But Chairman Seo was far from finished either. Before the old advisor could testify formally in front of investigators the following week, Seo's men kidnapped him quietly from his own home overnight, silencing the one clear voice that could confirm everything permanently in an official court record. Min Jae gathered together the members of his organization who still believed, somewhere deep down, in honor and loyalty rather than fear and cruelty. Instead of launching a violent war against his own uncle, he chose something far smarter and more patient. Piece by careful piece, he began exposing Chairman Seo's corruption to exactly the right people, using solid evidence instead of bullets and threats. Members who had quietly feared Seo for years, sometimes decades, began abandoning him one by one. Others reached out secretly to Min Jae, offering their loyalty and whatever support they could safely give. The entire balance of power inside the organization shifted faster than either of us had expected it would. Chairman Seo grew increasingly desperate as his allies disappeared, and desperate men, I was learning, make dangerous and unpredictable choices when they feel cornered. One morning, I woke to a string of worried, urgent messages from Min Jae's number. My own phone showed a single text sent from my account the night before, one I did not remember writing at all. "Don't come after me." I had disappeared. I did not know it yet myself, sitting confused and frightened in an unfamiliar windowless room. But somewhere out in the city, Kang Min Jae was reading those 4 short words over and over again, feeling something close to real panic for the very first time in his careful, controlled life. The truth turned out to be far worse than any simple text message could ever explain. I had gone to Chairman Seo myself, quietly and alone, without telling a single soul, and offered him a desperate trade. If I disappeared completely and permanently, he would finally release my mother for good and leave Min Jae's remaining people alone. Min Jae refused to accept that terrible bargain the very moment he learned exactly what I had done behind his back. Instead of attacking blindly and risking my life even further, he forced himself to stay patient, something that clearly did not come naturally to him anymore. He spent every waking hour gathering legal evidence solid enough to destroy Chairman Seo permanently, evidence that could never be argued away, buried, or bought off a second time. For once in this entire nightmare, careful thinking quietly won over raw, burning anger. Meanwhile, deep inside Chairman Seo's crumbling inner circle, cracks were forming that even he could not see coming. One of his most trusted lieutenants, sickened after years of watching violence and lies pile up around him, began secretly cooperating with investigators, handing over detailed records that proved every single crime Seo had ever quietly committed. Locked away in that quiet, windowless room, I had absolutely no way of knowing that rescue was already being built, piece by patient piece, by the very man I had tried so hard to protect by simply disappearing. I counted the days by the meals someone slid under the door. 3 a day, always the same rice and soup. I thought about my mother's laugh, about the warehouse fire that had connected 2 families without either of them knowing, and about Min Jae's hand pressed against the glass. I told myself he would come. I made myself believe it, because believing it was the only thing keeping me calm. The lieutenant's records turned out to be completely devastating. Financial documents, murder orders written in careful code, years of bribery payments to judges and officers alike, everything Chairman Seo had built his entire empire on was suddenly sitting in the hands of the police. Officers raided multiple properties across the city simultaneously at dawn, catching his remaining people completely off guard and unprepared. Seo tried desperately to run once he realized what was happening. Min-jae found him first, cornering him quietly in a narrow alley, not far from the very bus stop where everything between us had first started months earlier. For one long, terrible moment, I honestly imagined Min-jae might finally choose revenge after everything his uncle had stolen from him and from his father before that. Instead, he slowly lowered his weapon and let the police take Seo away alive in handcuffs, choosing justice over blood in the end. I was released from the room where Seo's remaining men had been keeping me that very same night the raids happened across the city. When I finally learned everything Min-jae had quietly sacrificed and carefully built to save me, all without ever once raising his gun in anger, something inside me finally understood exactly who he truly was underneath everything. But I also believed, quietly and sadly, that he deserved a peaceful life now, finally free of the danger that always seemed to follow wherever I went. So that night, I walked away without saying a single word of goodbye to him. Months slowly passed after that. Min-jae had completely dismantled what remained of the organization and transformed its businesses into lawful, honest companies, exactly as he had quietly promised himself he would if he ever survived Chairman Seo's grip on power. I heard about all of it through occasional newspaper articles, never once directly from him. One rainy morning, gray and quiet, I found myself running again, late for a new job interview, chasing the very same city bus at the very same stop where everything between us had first begun. This time, no convoy blocked the road. Instead, I saw him standing quietly by the curb in the drizzle, somehow older around the eyes now, watching the bus slowly approach through the rain. He stepped forward calmly and asked the driver, politely this time, to please wait just one more moment. The bus stayed. I froze completely on the wet sidewalk, my heart suddenly pounding louder than the engine idling beside me. Slowly, almost in disbelief, I climbed the steps onto the bus, and just before the doors closed, I turned back and smiled at him for the first time since everything between us had fallen apart months earlier. He smiled back at me, something soft and completely real, breaking through the calm armor he always wore like a second skin. Then, before the doors could fully shut behind me, I quietly stepped back off the bus. The driver called out, half laughing, asking if I actually wanted to go anywhere today. I did not answer him. I was too busy staring at Min-jae standing in the rain, both of us soaked and neither of us caring, both of us finally standing still after months of running. I stood there in the gentle rain and finally told him the truth I had been carrying silently for months. I had never truly stopped loving him, not for a single day. I had only wanted him to become the man I always secretly believed he could be, free from fear, free from his uncle's long shadow, free from guilt that was never truly his to carry alone in the first place. Min-jae told me something in return that I know I will never forget as long as I live. I was the one who had changed him completely, the very moment I blamed him for making me miss that bus so many months ago. Without my anger, my stubborn honesty, and my refusal to ever be bought with money, he believed quietly that he would have stayed cold and alone forever. Together, hand in hand, we walked to visit my mother in her bright new home, safe now, completely free of debt and fear, her medical bills finally settled behind us for good. The story ends the very same way it began, at a quiet bus stop on a rainy morning many months later. A city bus pulled up gently beside us one final time. This time, we stepped on board together, not because fate or danger had forced our hands the way it once had, but simply because we had both, at last, freely chosen the very same direction in life. I leave you with this lesson from my story. Sometimes the person who seems to ruin your life is actually the one who helps you become stronger than you ever thought possible. Real love is never truly about power, wealth, or control over another person. It is about sacrifice, honesty, and choosing kindness even when revenge feels like the far easier path to take.